The one on character disorders obviously is important, and the one on the traumatic neurosis is important. These are special cases, obviously. And so we will finish with that. Today what we are going to cover is how to go about assessing conflicts. And I assume that you all saw the lecture on the web page. So in a way you know how to go about assessing conflicts. At least you have an idea of what you're supposed to do. Really, many of these things are learned only if you do them. If you just listen to it, it'll be out of your mind in whatever time it takes to get out of people's mind. 1 day, 1 month, 1 year, but it'll be gone. If you use it in your work, and when that lecture was part of the lectures on the developmental profile that was used constantly. That was an instrument that was used constantly at the Hampshire Clinic. Everybody was assessed that way. And not only once, it was at the beginning of the treatment, in the middle of the treatment, at the end of treatment, and things of that kind. And so people were forced to think metapsychologically. And they were forced to organize the material, to collect the material, learn what material do you need to assess a patient the way an analyst assesses patients, which is a little different from the way a general psychiatrist will assess patients, right? The one is a descriptive kind of phenomena. You have 5 of this and 2 of the other, and you had them 6 months ago, and then you have this, that's descriptive, and it has its value, and it's certainly the classification that is used nowadays. And that's the way you bill insurance companies and so on. I mean, you have to use it. But the reality of it is that that's what it is. It is descriptive. It doesn't go past the facade of things. It doesn't go into the intimate nature of the phenomena and why it is that way and how it got to be that way and things of that kind. And because it is descriptive, it doesn't have much capacity like most descriptive things. A lot of things in the descriptive sense look very similar, In fact, if you go into a neighborhood where there are 3 types of houses, facades being built, all of them look the same. I mean, there are 2 or 3 variations. Yet, if you go inside, they may be very different. One may have 2 beds, another have 5. One has 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom. The other one has 3. It's very different. What is behind the facade, And that's the difference between this type of assessment. Obviously, if you are doing a psychiatric assessment, you follow the DSM-4 or whatever. If you are an analyst and you are assessing a patient for particularly for analytic treatment or for dynamic psychotherapy of any time, I think that be a very poor assessment. That's not the way analysts think. Analysts try to look behind the facade, the form of presentation. They try to understand what it is that you are being presented with, And in order to do that, you are forced to think metapsychologically, which, as you know, frequently metapsychology, you read the statements in papers, and people will use this term frequently in front of you, like meaning something very complex and difficult and strange, and that's not what it means at all. Metapsychology means that you look at any phenomena from 5 different points of view, And that's all it means. It doesn't mean that it's complex or simple. It depends on what the phenomena is, But you look at it from the dynamic point of view, the economic point of view, the topographical and structural point of view, and the adaptive point of view. And these different 5 ways of looking at it give you the most mind. That's what metapsychology means. It only means, meta means beyond. And so when Freud used it, he was meaning this thing that I do that I call psychoanalysis is beyond the psychology of these times, which is descriptive psychology. That's what he was saying. And we are in the same situation when you compare DSM-4 and the way we assess, analysts should assess patients or phenomena or psychopathology or normality for that matter. Then you have to use these different metapsychological points of view, the dynamic point of view, the economic point of view, the topographical structural point of view, the genetic point of view, and to that later on Heinz Hartmann, which was a terrific theoretician, added the adaptive point of view. And when you do that, then you have exploited the phenomena that is presented to you in a much more thorough manner. You have looked at it from several different angles, and you can give a much better description than just saying that. It's like saying, what is that? Well, say that's a microphone, but that doesn't say anything else. You know? Now, somebody else will ask, well, what kind of microphone it is? How many ohms it has? What volt does it require? Or what is the high fidelity capacity of it? Or what range of sounds does it cover? Can you use that for music or just for human voice? You see what I mean? That's the difference. The one is, what is it? It's a microphone, it's gray, it's triangular, and that's it. That's descriptive. The other goes behind that phenomena. And that's what you're trying to do. You're going to understand the psychoanalytic theory of neurosis, which you have to if you treat patients, or at least you should. This way of thinking is essential. Unfortunately, in most places it's not easy to acquire. You know, in London it was very easy because it was done every day, the whole day long, all into the evening, and people talk in these terms and look at the phenomena in these terms. In training institutes like this one and others, that doesn't happen. You know, you just hear about these things. So if you don't apply it to your own cases, it is a problem. We have thought in the past that we will try and get some cases and have them assessed by means of the profile so that you are forced to think that way. And the problem is how, when, and the complications that it creates. There are a few of us, and one can be all things to everybody, so that becomes a problem. But ideally, that's what should be done, because otherwise, as I say, yeah, all of this sounds very good, but in a year or so, it's gone. So, in any case, let's look at review briefly. You have any comments or questions about what you saw in the web page in terms of the assessment of conflicts? Sure.
When you talked about one side of the conflict always being conscious and one side was unconscious, and that adolescents can present and it looks like whatever they're doing is ego-syntonic, but in fact it is not, because the other side of the conflict is unconscious. They're not aware of it. How can you tell the difference between one that is dystonic and that is syntonic?
Well, I don't know that I describe it in those terms.
Okay.
But I know that I know what you're meaning.
Okay.
Oh, I understand your question. See, an adolescent may tell you, and I have talked to you about this and given this example before. Oh, I have no problem with masturbation at all. I mean, I don't have a problem. What do you mean? I mean, sex is, everybody, this is a modern world. I mean, sex is sex. It's an everyday phenomenon. There's nothing wrong with it, and things of that kind. That's his overt attitude to it. So you will think that he had no problem with any of this, whether it is masturbation, sexual intercourse, finding information about sex, and so on. Yet then you hear that on occasion he goes to the house encyclopedia and looks for things that concern sexuality, right? And then, after he had done that, he starts to get very worried and anxious that he may have had dirty hands and marked the page, and maybe when his father comes and uses the encyclopedia, may find that he was looking at sexual things. Well, clearly he's telling you something, but in fact the reality is another one. He is terrified that his father will find that he's a sexual animal, that he masturbates, that he's curious, that he wants to have sexual intercourse with a woman, which has all kinds of implications in terms of his Oedipus complex and his mother and his father and whatnot. And yet his external attitude, well, I don't have any problem with that. You see what I mean? I gave you the other day an example of a patient that I had many years ago in London who went to a university, a very fine, top university, very difficult to get into, and he had worked hard to get there. And at the time he was, I don't know, maybe 18, and he had the same attitude, that he didn't have any problem with masturbation or sexuality, and so when you were having psychotherapy, and when you tried, when it was obvious to me that he did, but me, no, no problem, that's your idea, I mean, you're an old man, I mean, I wasn't that old at the time, but for him I was old, you know, so I was 20 years old. And so he went to this place, and he was taken to the dormitories. He walked into one dormitory, and suddenly he had a panic attack. First time in his life. He had to run out of there as a mile a minute, and was not willing to go back to that place at all. He didn't know why. And it was completely absurd. He has worked for years to get himself into that place. It was the ambition of his life to go to that university. Yet, after he walked into one of the rooms, he developed a panic attack. He had to leave the place. He simply left the place. I mean, ran out of there. And the person was looking astonished at this reaction. He had to go. You know, clearly there was something wrong with him. And of course he came. He didn't know what it was. He just had a panic attack, and he was not willing to go back there because he didn't want to feel that way. Well, you worked with him, you found out that the problem was very simple. The doors had no lock inside. And his fantasy was, somebody can come in while I am masturbating. So.
And that's when he presented for treatment.
Huh?
And that's when he came for treatment, was at that point.
No. He had been in treatment before.
Okay.
He had been in treatment before and was denying that he had any problems with masturbation or anything of the sort. It was obvious that he has an enormous amount of conflict with it, but he was denying it. And in this case, it became obvious because he developed that, because of that sequence of events. And even then, he had that fantasy and repressed it immediately. When he came to me, he didn't tell me what the fantasy was that had crossed his mind. It took weeks of work for him to say, oh, now I remember. What I thought when I saw the door without a lock was I may be masturbating and somebody will welcome me. Do you understand what I mean? Which meant that he had a hell of an amount of conflict with masturbation, and whether he was right or he was dirty, or whether he should feel okay about it, or whether he should feel very guilty, and clearly he felt very guilty. So it's not a question so much of syntonic and dystonic, because in reality, as you see, it's dystonic because it is conflictual. But the external expression is, I don't have any problem with it, you know. So at a conscious level, he will tell you, I have no problems, but you see the problem all over the place. And then one of the issues that you have as a therapist, how do you get past that? If you know that that's one of the central conflicts that is leading to symptom formation in these kids, you know. So the first thing is, one has to be very clear about what a conflict is. Conflict is not a problem. It's distinct from a problem. A conflict, and that's coming back to your question, may be just two forces, one opposed to one another. One is an instinct, one is a superego attitude to that instinct, or an ego attitude, superego attitude to that instinct. If it is a type of conflict, which will be called intersystemic conflict, in other words, between each system, ego, superego system, intersystemic conflict. And as you will see in a moment, there are many ways of describing conflicts. All of them are important. All of them have to be in the forefront of your mind. But it may be more than one force on each side. It may be one impulse here, several objections on this side, or several forces in conflict with one another. It's not necessarily always a one-to-one kind of situation. Yeah? But of these two, at least one of them, if not both of them, have to be, you can be aware of them. You don't know one of the sides of that equation. One of the sides of that equation is not known to you. Like to this boy. This boy here, the consciousness said, I don't have any problem. In other words, he was not really aware that he had a lot of problems with his sexuality and his sexual masturbatory fantasies and so on, which were interesting and had some incestuous qualities to it because he had sisters and things of that kind. And that was obviously enormously conflictual. But not at a conscious level. You see, not at a conscious level. So, if the two things you are conscious, then they are on top of the table. You and I are here, you have an idea, I have another, we can exchange it. But if you are in Timbuktu and I am here, we can never resolve the problem because we can get together at the same level. It's a metaphor that Freud uses of the polar bear and the whale. The whale lives in the ocean, the polar bear is on top of the snow in Alaska or wherever it may be in Canada. And they can, they just can negotiate the problem. So if you have, I always give the same example because it's a simple example. If somebody, let's say a girl that has two suitors, and she's thinking that she wants to get married, it's time to do that, both are nice, one has these advantages, the other has that other advantage and so on. Well, she has a problem, not a conflict. You see what I mean? Now, it conceivably may be that in that same example, for example, that she may prefer boy A to boy B. She's more attractive to boy A, for example. But when she thinks of boy A, there is something that she, though she likes him, she says, I can't choose him. I'm not comfortable with it. I can't go that way. I will have to choose this man, and yet I don't like him as much as I like the other fellow. You see what I mean? That's different. That is, she knows some of the question. There is a part of the question that she doesn't know, which may be something like this, that boy A is chosen on the basis of an incestuous identification with the father. For some reason, that boy reminds her of her father, and that makes boy be a forbidden object. And though she likes him and that's the man she would like to marry, she can do it. That's different. You see, that part of the situation is unknown to her, it's unconscious, and that's a neurotic conflict. The other is the problem. Which of the two you choose and on what basis? You see what I mean? And that's a difference, and that's a very important difference. So, That's the definition of a neurotic conflict. The needs of necessity, one of both parts of the question has to be at an unconscious level, the phenomenon. Now, and I've already told you about the distinction between problems and conflicts. We have all kinds of problems that we have to make decisions that may be difficult. They may be difficult problems to make a decision about. But generally speaking, when you have two choices and they are not caught in neurotic conflicts, if you examine the facts carefully, you take your time, you find the information, you have the facts. In the end, you say, well, all in all, obviously this is a better solution. That's the way you go. No problem. If you have conflicts, you may not even be able to find the facts. You blind yourself to them. You can find them. You can ask for the facts. Even if you have them, you can touch it, like in this example that I gave you, the girl that may prefer boy A and she would like really to marry him. She's excited by him a lot more, let's say, sexually than B. And she obviously will say, well, why would I marry B if I like this man so much better? And yes, she can do it. You see, that's different. There is a part of that problem that she's not capable of. There is a fact about that relationship to that boy, which is the identification with the incestuous idea of the similarity with the father, that she is not conscious of. And that is a neurotic conflict in that situation. Yeah. Now, there might be many parts to a conflict. There might be only two parts, as I told you. And then there is a question, too, of which conflicts are really open to us. Not all conflicts that human beings have are open to our, psychoanalytic armamentarium. Some of them are not. Now, the other thing that is important about conflict is the magnitude of the forces involved in the conflict. For example, if let's say that somebody has, for whatever reason, have been provoked by a friend or an enemy, somebody that may be his rival in wooing a girl or in getting a job or whatever it may be, and he has been provoked that person and offended by that person, and so he feels very angry with that person. Feels angry. Well, if the anger is limited, the conflict doesn't get to materialize itself, because you can get angry. There's nothing wrong with being angry. Now, if the anger is of such a magnitude that he starts to have fantasy and wants to kill this son of a gun, that's a different problem. Then the ego says, what? Are you bananas? If you kill somebody, you go to jail. And the superego says, what? Are you going to kill a human being? You can do that. You see, that's a different issue. In other words, the magnitude of one of the forces in conflict, in this case, the drive, the aggressive drive, if it is very little, neither the ego gets very rattled nor the superego, because it knows, the ego knows that nothing is going to happen. You are angry with that person, period. You may even have the thought, Jesus, I like to kill him, but you know you are not going to do it. All right? So that doesn't create a problem. You will not provoke. It's not a conflict that will lead to symptoms. You know what I mean? Now, on the other hand, if the intensity evolves to such a magnitude that the ego feels, and the superego too, that you may not have the ability to control the murderous impulses, and you may in fact kill that person, then you will develop a hell of a conflict. If you have the right kind of ego and the right kind of superego, because that's not acceptable, under the conditions under we live, yeah.
But I think you were saying in your readings also that there isn't a singular event that causes or neurotic symptoms. That it also, you're looking at the history and you're looking at the wish, the unconscious wishes, according to the readings that we had earlier.
Yes, but that's one case. You see, things may have more or less of a past. Somebody may, I don't know, let's say that you're going to the street there, and somebody is there with a gun and said, Tom,
Yeah, that would be scary.
give me all your clothing and your money and your watch and so on, or I kill you.
Yeah.
Yeah? And that'd be very scary. You may do a number of things. Do what he wants, or you may think that you are going to challenge him or fight with him or try and knock him out or whatever it may be. You see, that doesn't require a background, is what I'm trying to tell you. You don't have to look for the genetic roots of such an event, because the event in itself is capable of triggering your aggression and your anxiety and your self-preservative instinct. This man is going to kill you unless you are a very passive and get overwhelmed by anxiety. You are going to defend yourself. You say, if he's going to try and kill me, I'm going to try and kill him before he does me in. You know what I mean? And that's perfectly logical and reasonable. You don't have to go to the genetic roots of that event. The event in itself justifies the behavior. Now, once the event happens, it may lend itself to write a lot of other aggressive fantasies that you have in the past into it. And that may, in fact, may be what makes your ability to defend yourself impossible. Let's say that you are a kid that had enormous murderous impulses to your father. And you wanted to, in fantasy, you know, somewhere, you wanted to eliminate him. And now that you have to defend yourself and you have to kill this person, the same problem, you may not be able to do it, because it's like killing your father. It reactivates this type of fantasy, and then you are paralyzed, and in fact you are dead. Understand what I mean?
And that's the point. When I'm trying, and there's just you're right. A singular event. What I was trying to get at was the idea that are all conflict situations multi-determined.
Oh yeah,
so we read about. See,
most of them are.
Okay.
Yes.
But your point is well taken. Some of them are not. Some are singular events with overwhelming stimulus. That
sure.
That's it right there.
Sure.
And so that's
sure.
what I want to check on.
Okay. So the magnitude of the forces is obviously very important. It is important too to know that if you have seen in the developmental, excursions that we have been making during these lectures, that many conflicts develop. There are any number of developmental conflicts in the course of development that generally are mastered and don't lead to symptom formation. In other words, you don't establish a fixation, you in fact master it, or you deal with it in a way that not only doesn't create a neurotic conflict and symptoms for the future and a fixation point, but in fact enriches your development, your character. For example, you sublimate something. Well, that makes you better. You produce a reaction formation that makes you clean instead of dirty. Well, that too is a good solution. So not all developmental conflicts lead to later psychopathology. Many of them go into what is not called the personality or your character. Character and personality is used with many meanings, yes, particularly character. There is what you will call, and we'll be discussing that next time, what is called the normal character. We all have a character, that is not abnormal. And many of the solutions of these conflicts go into your character. For example, let's say that you deal with some of your inner impulses by reaction formation and becoming clean and punctual and, things of that kind. Well, that will be one of your characteristics. It's part of your character. You will tend always to be clean, to be reasonable, not to get messed up, not to appear dirty anywhere, to take a bath every day, whatever it is. That is reasonable. And it enriches you, makes you more socially adaptable. And that goes into your character. That will characterize you as the kind of person that you are. Well, many conflicts do that. But assume now that instead of staying at that level, it becomes that you become phobic of dirt, and wherever there is a speck of dust on you, you have to go and take a shower, or you have to wash your hands 50 times a day. Well, that is a character disorder. You understand what I mean? And it's different. Or you are organized, methodic, and punctual, and so on, and all of that is good within reason. But if it goes to an extreme that everybody about you thinks you are crazy and intolerable and impossible to deal with because you are too demanding, too exacting, and unreasonable. You are a second rate. So how mean, Mama? You are not here at this 12 and 1 second. Well, that's a character disorder. You see what I mean? It has bypassed what would be a normal character, and it's a solution that goes into a character, but a character that is not normal, a character that in fact is pathological in many ways. The advantage, as I told you, of that solution is that the person has no neurotic suffering. He bothers everybody around him, but he has no neurotic suffering at all, and he's not likely to come to you for treatment. Except, as I told you in one of the previous lectures, that if he is an intelligent and not an irrational human being, but a reasonable person, after a while he will say, you know, there has to be something wrong with me because everybody dislikes me. Everybody criticizes my attitude to this, that, or the other. And in fact, it does me more harm than it does me good. So, though I don't know why it is, I think people should do it the way I'm suggesting, there must be something wrong with me. You see, that's different. And then we are in the problem we were talking before, that you have to transform the character disorder into a neurosis. Yes. An obsessional character has to become an obsessional neurosis before you can treat it, you know. If you are going to have structural changes, otherwise what you are doing is, like many people will do, which is some forms of therapy, which are either supportive or cognitive or have elements of both, and will teach you that that creates a problem. You don't know where the problem is coming from, but it will teach you to avoid doing that because it creates a problem. But you are under stress doing that because your natural tendency is to go and do it. In fact, you are fuming. You may not show it because somebody tells you, well, don't you see what the result is of your behavior? And you, being intelligent, will say, yeah, I see that, but nothing has changed inside you. You understand what I mean? All right. Some, as I said, promote development. I already gave you some examples of that. And the other thing is, many of these things to development stay there, but they are balanced. In other words, there is a drive here, but there is a defense against it here. Mm-hmm. And as long as that balance is retained, there is no problem. But if events do take place that will increase the intensity, let's say, of the drive, then that may create a problem, depending on how much the intensity has increased and has the ego got the resources to stop that increase of. It's like a dam, you know. If there is so much water in the reservoir, the dam will hold it. If it rains for 15 days on a stop and it grows 10 feet longer, it will overwhelm the dam, you know. Or if the dam gets weakened by some reason or was effective to start with, clearly it won't have the ability to contain, you know. And there are things that happen to human beings that produce some kind of enfeeblement of the egos, you know.
So you repeat, please.
Yeah, there are things that happen to people that will make your ego weaker.
Oh.
You can deal with it properly. And you get a little senile, a little dementia.
Training.
Exactly.
What?
I said life. It makes your ego weaker.
Some people it happens earlier, some people it happens later, but it tends to happen. So,
genetic gift.
So, all of these factors are important. But if you think about, we are talking about what? About economic factors? We are not. We have talked about some genetic factors. That means if this girl can choose a boy, the genetic reason for it is that it reactivates Oedipus complex and the boy has become an incestuous object. You see that you are going to the genetic roots of the phenomena. You are looking at it dynamically. What are the forces in conflict? You know, one is an impulse, the other one is a superego objection, and so on. This is what you are doing constantly, and that's the way you should approach it, you know. Now, clearly, all symptoms that appear, neurotic symptoms in neurosis, are the result of conflicts. Psychoanalysis is a theory of conflicts. The question is, and we will get into that in the second part of this thing in a little more detail, which ones are the forces that are in conflict? Yeah. I told you already that there are many things that when you are looking at the symptoms that are produced, that some symptoms, and we will see that next time, as well, maybe today or next time, the symptom formation, how symptoms get formed, but certain symptoms in certain type of disorders which tend to occur at certain specific developmental stages have some specific characteristics. For example, those that are related to an obsessional neurosis, which is from the anal stage, are usually characterized by certain things: displacement, reaction formation, doing and undoing, things of that kind. And you see that's the behavior of the patient. You see that's in his behavior. Automatically, you can see where it is coming from. Automatically, you have a signpost that said, this man, if that is the only conflict that he has, is shown in this way. You said, this man conflicts came from that stage, and that's where we have to look. You know, that's where the solution to his problems is. You are going to undo the fixation and really produce some structural changes. That's where you have to go. The rest is marking time to get there. Until you get there, nothing really dramatic will change. He may even get better. He may even tell you, I'm fine now. And yet, if you haven't gotten there, he's not really fine. He has a transference cure, you know, or a magic cure, and he's not cured at all. It will come back sooner or later, and generally it is sooner rather than later, okay? Hysterical symptoms, on the other hand, are symptoms in which both tendencies are represented simultaneously. I gave you the example of the fellow who came with a fist like this, and essentially what it was is that he wanted to smash the head of a child that had him, was driving him mad, you know. Looking back now, this is true. It is a true example. I saw this in an emergency room. But looking back, I now think that child had ADHD, only that this was 40 years ago. I don't know what they talk about that in those days. And you certainly would, you just were looking at the arm of the man. But the provocation of the child were really not that the child was a bad child, but he had ADHD. And like most ADHD kids, if it is a bad case of it, they can drive bananas the family. So this man came that way. Well, in that symptom, which is a conversion hysteria symptom, is represented both the drive, the wish to smash the child, kill him, and the defense, the force against it that doesn't let the fist smash the child. See, that's a different type of symptom than an obsessional symptom that tend to happen in two stages. You do something and then you undo it later. Here, it's all in the symptom, in the same symptom. You know what I mean? There are significant differences in these things. And that's why all of the things that we were talking about, the phases of development and the component instincts and all of that, is so important. Because that way you can dissect in your mind what it is that happened to this individual. And you know where to go, what stage, what may have been the forces involved in this, and then it takes time for you to unravel this thing, but you are not lost following anybody up the garden path, not knowing where you are going ever, So obviously this focuses you, and it focuses you because it shows you how the neuroses are formed, how the symptoms are produced, by what mechanism, and on the basis of what fixation and what forces against the impulses and things of that kind, yeah? So,
that was doing, undoing, obsessive compulsive and hysterical symptoms are from the anal stage?
No. The obsessional symptoms are from the anal stage. The hysterical symptoms are from the phallic stage.
Oh, okay.
Two completely different stages.
Yeah. Well, what was the third one that you gave as an example then? Doing, undoing, obsessive compulsive and
displacement.
Displacement. Okay, thank you. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, these are the defenses that are more typical of the...
Is that?
Obsessional neurosis, doing, undoing, displacement, reaction planning.
Okay, I didn't get that one. Thanks.
On the other hand, you see, this is where there are conflicts, and then symptoms are the resultant of it. And the symptom is telling you the story of that person, the developmental history of that person. If you can read the symptoms, if you understand how the symptoms get to be formed, then you have very good signposts to get oriented within the chaos of the neurosis of a patient that is now 40 years and is all lost in the fog of time, you know what I mean? Analyses are long, but if you have no way of penetrating into that fog, they'd be forever and you don't get anywhere. You understand what I mean? Now, obviously, there are cases in where there is an impulse, but there is no ego attitude to object to it, or a superego attitude to object to it, or in that culture, that's what it should happen. In that case, you have either a sociopath, a psychopath type of person, or you have somebody who has developed a perversion, for whatever reasons, yeah? One of the two. So, and he will have problems. He be brought to you, you know, and he will have problems. I mean, the judge will say, you have to see a psychiatrist or I send you to jail. Why? Because whatever, he's a transvestite, or he's a transsexual, or he's a homosexual and was caught soliciting somebody, or because because he's stealing, you know. And he doesn't show any remorse, or he sees something he wants and he takes it. He has no superego. Now, when he comes to you, yeah, then you have to sort that out. Generally speaking, somebody who genuinely doesn't have any objection to this behavior and feels no guilt and no shame, if once you explore that, you'll find that there are good reasons why that is the case. And the most probable thing is that he has not introjected into his superego the prohibitions that should go with his culture, because his environment was such, or his primary objects that raised him and he identified with did not convey this to them. They don't come from heaven, you know. It's not by the Holy Spirit coming into you that this happens. You have to, you know, learn this from the environment. Yeah. And if that hadn't happened, then you don't have a conflict. You have somebody that is producing behaviors, not symptoms. He's not symptomatic. He doesn't give a hoot about having a stolen car or whatever it is, or about having dressed like a woman if he's a man, or whatever it may be. He doesn't give a hoot about it, except that he gets into conflict with society. And that's why he's brought to you. In reality, he has no neurotic suffering either, you know. And now, and that's important, you know why? Because this is the type of thing that you don't have the tools to deal with. If he really has not introjected enough of a superego, given the conditions under which he grew and the environment in which he grew, you have no means of introducing it there. As I told you the other day, the best you can do is see if he's intelligent. And you build a good relationship with him is to show him that the way he's going about it is not going anywhere but to a bad place. And is that where he wants to go? And he may be able then, on the basis of sheer ego, IQ, and capacity and strength, to control much of his behavior. But will he control it all? Not likely. Not likely. He doesn't have what most normal human beings require in order to be able to control his impulses. And it's very difficult to do that on the sheer strength of ego reasoning. Very difficult. Very difficult. There are a lot of people that will tell you, I know exactly what I was going to do. I knew I shouldn't do it. I went ahead and did it. And you know what, doctor? That's the history of my life. You understand what I mean? And you look at them, and these are people, sometimes incredibly gifted, highly resourceful people with maybe degrees, university degrees, for God's sake. You know what I mean? It's not that they lack ego resources, but it's that the balance of these forces is not quite right, or they may not have acquired, in the process of development what is required to create a conflict. So they are driven by the impulses. Yeah. Okay. Now, what Freud says, for example, about the obsessional symptoms is, so that you know the difference, is that all symptoms imply they are a solution to a problem. It's not a good solution, and some of them are much of a worse solution than others, depending on the nature of the symptom and so on. But they are a solution to a conflict. All right? And they always imply some degree of satisfaction. You see, in the hysterical symptom, the drive is being expressed, is being gratified, not totally, but halfway. You understand what I mean? With the fist hanging there in the middle of the space. And at the same time, in the same symptom, the defense is manifested. In the obsessional neurosis, the satisfaction comes in two stages. The first one is the doing. Yeah? And that gratifies something on the instinctual side of that equation. And then in the undoing, which probably gratifies something on the other side of the equation, because you undo what you did before, the aggressive piece of behavior, the abusive piece of behavior, and so on. I have given you examples of this, in the past. Okay. Now, on the other hand, as you remember, when we were talking about developmental issues, the conflicts at the beginning, you have no conflict with the human nature. You are a human being, you are a baby, you are born with a number of instincts. That's what, genetics have determined for this species, and you have no objection to it at all. None. But because we are social animals, and because we live in certain type of cultures and so on, to which we have adapted, and because we have to control our impulses in order to be able to remain social animals and have families and build cities and so on, all of which has enormous adaptive value, obviously, so it's important, then those that raise us have to set limits to these instincts. And have to say, you can only gratify in this way or in that way. This is gratifiable, that is a no. We will punish you very hard if you do this, and so it goes, But essentially, at the beginning, the human being has no conflict with himself, or his instincts, or his body products, if that's what it is. I mean, he, as I told you when we were talking about this, that's a manifestation of affect. He's giving you a part of himself. He doesn't see it the way you and I do, and say, he doesn't see it that way at all until we teach him that. And to teach him that, as you remember, requires that his ego acquire the cognitive capacity to understand your disgust. And not only that, it requires that he develops an attachment to that object that shows the disgust, because then the conflict is established. The developmental conflict. What is he going to please? Himself, his anal tendencies, or his mother, and become clean? You understand what I mean? And so essentially, the conflicts at the beginning are external conflicts, developmentally. All right. All of this is important. You say, well, what is important of this for the psychoanalytic theory of neurosis? Well, because a lot of people, for whatever reason, doesn't internalize some of these conflicts, and they remain conflicts with the external world. And because that's true, yeah, and because they don't have a superego or an ego, or a combination of both of those that will help them to control the behavior and be adaptive to the society, we have had to develop all kinds of external structures to control the behavior. And we create courts and laws and the police and prisons and the death penalty and whatnot in order to control what they can control. You understand what I mean? And of course, these are extreme cases. But the fact remains that many people still is at the level of conflict with the external world. And that may be for many reasons. All right? One of them is they never internalize this conflict for whatever reasons. For example, if you are if your ego is a little impoverished or not well developed, you are a little borderline in intelligence and so on, and don't have the capacity to understand much of the things that the objects are claiming for you to do or not to do and things of that kind, you may not be able to internalize anything. You don't know how to do it or what it is that they want. So you continue to have this never-ending conflict with the external world. The same is true. Take somebody that gets demented and was anybody. I hate to give a name, but a demented person that may have been a president of a country may suddenly lose control over their sphincters, and they pee on themselves and they defecate on themselves. And there is no way you can do anything about it. Why? Because the ego is gone. There's only the drive. And so they will do this, which means if the ego gets weakened, then all kind of things happen. Now, that again, is that a neurotic conflict? No. Can you cure that by means of psychotherapy? No, obviously not. You have to make these distinctions. Now, you have somebody that is 10, 12, 20, and he has encopresis and never got toilet trained and is not mentally retarded and so on. That's a different situation. That man is using the encopresis as a symptom, which is probably the compromised formation of a conflict that is resolvable. He has the ego. He doesn't want that to happen to him. He's ashamed of it. He feels guilty. He hides it, like children that do that frequently do. You know what I mean? While a demented person doesn't hide a damn thing. He doesn't have the mind to think that there is anything wrong with that, or that anybody will object to it, or he doesn't have any reaction to their objection. He doesn't understand. He's in a different world, So all of these things are important. In any case, as you know, all the external conflicts are internalized sooner or later, and that makes the basis of your superego. And now you don't need, if you are a normal human being, in most cases, I wouldn't say always, but in most cases, you can control your behavior by means of the interaction between your ego and your superego. And you can hear the demands of your drive, and your ego will counsel you, no, you can do that. And if that is enough, your superego will start to raise some little hell that forces the ego to say, no way. And then you may create a situation where symptoms may be produced. And that is certainly a typical neurotic conflict. But you see how you have to discriminate that if you use a descriptive approach. Encopresis is the same, but encopresis of a demented person is the same type of encopresis of a 12-year-old that is normal otherwise. You understand what I mean? The facade is the same. What is behind is totally different. What you can do with it is completely different as well. So, in any case, when all the conflicts are internalized, then you have developed a superego, and then, of course, you have to find the authority for that superego to impose these commands with some degree of effectiveness, and as we have been discussing in the past, that happens with the resolution of the Oedipus complex. Now, the other type of conflicts that we will discuss a little bit is what I call internal conflicts. And what are internal conflicts? Well, you heard in the lecture, internal conflicts are things that are typical for the nature of the human animal. In other words, we have in ourselves, inbuilt from the moment that we are born, opposite tendencies. And they concern mostly activity and passivity. Yeah, we can be active, we can be passive, and we are turned sometimes into whether we should go that way or the other way. The same is true of the polarity love and hate. We have that capacity, though if you watch the tape, obviously you know under which conditions that happen. Love and hate in the unconscious system, in the id, they can live happily together, because in the id there is no contradiction. And the rule of the id is a pleasure principle. Yeah? The id it can see hate and love to the same object, which means I love that person, but I'm going to kill her with no problem at all. Once it tries to get to consciousness, which means to the ego conscious apparatus, then that's not acceptable there, neither to the ego, because it knows the consequences of killing somebody, yeah, and because the ego in itself has developed certain capacities like being empathic and the capacity to identify with the sufferer and things of that kind, and that in itself is a restraint in the behavior. And if that is not enough, there is a superego that really comes with a whip and crack his rear hand and say, you can do that. So these are important differences that you always have to be looking for, and things of that kind. Once it gets into the ego, though, love and hate can exist side by side. Sometimes, you love somebody very dearly, but you know that you hate him too. And that's fine. What can happen is that you will express both feelings simultaneously, actually in behavior or in consciousness. Generally speaking, you have to repress one, and generally speaking, the one you repress is the negative, aggressive, destructive impulses, because generally speaking, in most cases, there be objection to those. There is no objection to loving feelings. Generally speaking, there are exceptions to all rules. So there is then the passive-active, the love and hate, and the bisexuality. Now, this is interesting in terms of the psychoanalytic theory of the neurosis, because you have to know how they develop. And you have to know why a person goes more in conflict, let's say, in terms of his sexual identity than the next person. And sometimes it's because of the developmental experiences, the interaction with the environment, the experience that he has. Sometimes it's that he was born with some kind of not quite normal balance. If he's a girl, let's say if it is a girl, in terms of her femininity and masculinity, feminine and masculine drive, or if it's a boy, the masculine and feminine drives. And if there is a significant imbalance there, let's say that somebody is born with more femininity, a male, that is the norm. Clearly, any environmental experience will have an enormous influence, because that seed is being planted in ground that will be fertilized to develop that kind of conflict. It's already inclined in that direction. You understand what I mean? Certain events or in that ground, it's like planting the tree in exactly the right conditions. It will grow to be an enormous tree. You plant it in the wrong conditions, and it will grow some, but not too much. It may even die before it gets to be an adult. You know what I mean? And this is the same. All of these things are obviously incredibly important. And so you have to look at the balance of these things. Why? Because that's part of the prognosis. If you come to the conclusion that most of this was interactional and related to development and not to an abnormal proportion in the bisexual constitution, then you have somebody who has a heck of a lot better prognosis, and you can say this is probably due to neurotic conflicts. You know, if that's not the case, then you say, well, these are the limits that I have. I mean, I can go against the genetic makeup of people. You just cannot. The same is true in terms of passivity and activity. You know.
That's what I was curious about, that part there, the active or passive. I guess what you're saying is that, like, a kid can try over and over again and just not get response and not be reinforced, and so eventually they will learn to be either highly active or highly passive.
Well, it's that the balance is different. You see, if you tend to be a passive child, clearly any event later on in the developmental sense that leads to passivity,
yes,
is going to reinforce what is already a natural inclination that you have. While if you have born with an incredible amount of go in you, these events is not going to stop you.
Right, I would agree.
So these are the differences, and this is what I'm trying to highlight for you, because these are the natural limits of what you can do. And there is we don't have the means to measure this in millimeters or grams or anything like that, but we can get general feelings, and you have to be very careful how you get these general feelings. But generally, a good developmental history will tell you, whether there was not the normal balance between, let's say, the bisexual constitution of passivity and activity or love and hate. Some children have an incredible amount of aggression and hate in them, and it doesn't seem to be balanced. They are dangerous. In fact, they are 7, 8 years old, and you say, Jesus, he's dangerous like hell. This child is going to kill somebody as an adult. Why? He's already decapitating cats, or opening them up, or stabbing them and things of that kind. You know what I mean? And sometimes they come from abusive family. He has been abused. Then that's developmental factors, interactional factors may have influenced that behavior. Sometimes they come from incredibly good, gentle families. And he is a son in that family. He was born with this. He said, we don't understand him. At home, this is horrendous. Everybody is horrified. We don't know where he, what these inclinations from. Indeed, they have tried to correct him, and there is no way of doing that. You see, these are your natural limits, and there are limits to what we can do. And these limits need to be assessed. How far can you really go, given the innate givens of this patient?
Okay, so intrasystemic or internal conflicts are, when that category is really about the innate givens.
Yeah.
Okay.
These are innate givens of human beings. Internal conflicts, you are born with this predisposition. They can be reinforced by external events, but you are born like that. It's not two ways about it.
So in terms of love and hate, you're talking about libidinal and aggressional drive.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. That's what is behind it.
What can you do for kids who have this intense aggressive drive that's so difficult to get under control and tame?
Well, it depends why it is that they have it.
Say it's a genetic.
If he is born with an incredible, and it may be for many reasons. You see, it may be that his aggressive drive is out of proportion. There are people like that, and he has some genetic givens. You see, some people have 2 Y chromosomes. They are dangerous like hell, generally speaking. These are males that instead of an XY chromosome, they have 2 Y chromosomes, for example. All of this has some biological background that we may not be very well aware of, but that much we do know, that in jail, a lot of violent, dangerous, murderous individuals, when examined, may have 2 Y chromosomes, which makes them very... Well, what can you do for him? Nothing. Really. That's the way he is. It's very little that you can do for him, you know. Maybe he has a very good ego, and you get him in time. You can give him... through an identification with you and your kindness and so on, he might make some identification, and you may teach him what the dangers are, why he could get himself into trouble. And you are giving him like instructions as to how to blow his nose and keep it clean. But will he be able to use that instruction all the time? Not necessarily, no. You see, these are the natural limitations. Now, on the other hand, if it is somebody that acquire this through an identification with a violent father, let's say, which abused the mother and things of that kind, and is intelligent and was not traumatized, and I tell you why in a moment, it is very likely that you can do a lot for them, and you can change that. But you have to be careful. You see, the more we learn about these things, we learn that things that may be traumatic, and many of these situations are traumatic in the life of small children, to be subjected to this kind of experiences. Very frightening, sometimes simply abusive experiences. Does something to brain development. It makes areas of your brain, people that have been traumatized have areas of the brain that are different from other people. And once that happens, they have a susceptibility to produce certain reactions when presented with certain type of stimuli. And again, that is a lot more difficult to undo, you know. That just, if it is a circuit paths were created that are abnormal and trigger all anxiety or whatever it may be, fear or violence and so on, but that's all there is. There is nothing added to it. All you have to do is to extinguish these circuits and create alternative ways of dealing with it, and that's feasible. But is it feasible to alter the anatomical structure of the brain? Or, worse than that, many of these experiences force the areas of the brain that produce certain type of neurotransmitter, all of which are related to this different kind of expression of affects, to be produced in enormous quantities, which means the natural biochemical electrical response of the brain may be altered permanently. Can you change that? Well, that's an interesting question. Possibly not, you know. That's different from the strictly neurotic conflicts between drive and a world that objects to it and wants to socialize you, but has not brutalized you, has not grown you in fear or terrified or abused, whether it is sexually, physically, or both. That's different. And you have to take all of this into account. If you don't do that, you are not understanding the structure of what you are seeing and how far you can go and what you can do with it, you know. And unfortunately, even at the present time, we are still somewhat limited, and possibly we assume frequently that we can do more in certain cases than we really can, you know. But all of that is becoming clearer and clearer by the minute. I think we probably can stop now for a little while and then